Years later, Clara returned to her hometown as a celebrated violinist, her name now recognized far beyond the small community where she had grown up. The once shy girl who carried a battered violin in a scuffed case was now a confident performer who graced concert halls across the globe. Her music had taken her to cities she'd only dreamed of visiting: Paris, Vienna, New York, and earned her standing ovations from audiences around the world. Yet despite her success, Clara never forgot the place that had shaped her. The town hadn't changed much since she left. The same cracked sidewalks, the same cozy diner where her mother still worked long hours, and the same park where she used to practice under the stars all remained familiar. But there was something different this time: the way people looked at her. Instead of dismissive glances or cruel smirks, Clara saw admiration and pride in their eyes. Parents pointed her out to their children, saying, "See, that's Clara. She started with nothing, but look how far she's come." Clara had returned for a special reason: to perform at the very community center where she had competed years ago. The event was organized to raise funds for local arts programs, an initiative Clara herself had helped launch. As she stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. Among them were old classmates, teachers, and neighbors, people who had once doubted her but now cheered her on enthusiastically. For a moment, Clara paused, overwhelmed by the warmth of their welcome. When the applause settled, Clara lifted her violin, the same one she had found discarded in a trash bin all those years ago. Its scratches and cracks told the story of her journey, each imperfection a reminder of the struggles she had overcome. Before playing, she addressed the audience. "This violin," she began, holding it up so everyone could see, "was once considered worthless. People laughed when they saw it, just like they laughed at me. But I learned that value isn't about appearances. It's about what you create with what you have." Her voice softened as she continued. "Music saved me during some of the hardest times in my life. It gave me hope when I felt invisible and strength when I thought I couldn't go on. And today, I want to remind you that no matter where you come from or what challenges you face, your dreams are worth fighting for. You don't need perfect tools or ideal circumstances to make something beautiful. You just need heart." With that, Clara began to play. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, weaving together notes of pain, triumph, and gratitude. Each stroke of her bow seemed to echo the emotion she had poured into her journey: the loneliness, the determination, the joy. As the final note hung in the air, the room fell silent before erupting into thunderous applause. Many in the audience wiped away tears, moved not only by the music, but also by the woman behind it. After the performance, Clara stayed to meet fans and sign autographs. A young girl approached her shyly, clutching a beginner's violin almost as worn as Clara's first instrument. "I want to play like you someday," the girl said, her voice trembling with awe. Clara knelt down to meet her eye level and smiled warmly. "You already have everything you need," she replied, gently touching the girl's violin. "Just keep playing, no matter what anyone says." That evening, as Clara packed up her violin and prepared to leave, she took one last look at the stage. Standing there, she remembered the scared teenager who had once stood in the same spot, afraid of rejection and ridicule. How far she had come, not because she had forgotten her past, but because she had embraced it. Every struggle, every insult, Clara's victory at the talent competition sent shockwaves through her small town. News of her second-place win spread quickly, and soon everyone was talking about the girl who had once been dismissed as trash symphony. Her classmates, who had spent years mocking her, now scrambled to claim they'd always believed in her. Some even tried to befriend her, inviting her to sit with them at lunch or asking about her music. Clara found it hard to trust their sudden kindness, but she chose not to dwell on their past behavior. Instead, she focused on what truly mattered: preparing for her audition at the prestigious music academy. The weeks leading up to the audition were intense. Clara practiced tirelessly, often staying up late into the night perfecting every note. Mr. Grayson continued to mentor her, offering guidance and encouragement whenever she doubted herself. "You've already proven you can move people with your music," he reminded her one evening as they sat together on the steps outside her apartment. "Now all you have to do is show them that same passion." When the day of the audition finally arrived, Clara traveled to the city with a mix of excitement and nerves. The conservatory building was grand and intimidating, its towering columns and polished floors making her feel out of place. As she walked inside, clutching her violin case tightly, she noticed other candidates chatting confidently with their parents or teachers. Many carried expensive instruments in sleek cases, and some wore outfits tailored to impress. Clara felt a pang of insecurity but quickly reminded herself why she was there, not to compete with others, but to share her story through her music. Her audition went better than she could have hoped. Though her technique wasn't flawless, her performance was raw and heartfelt, leaving the panel visibly moved. When the head judge announced that she had earned a spot in the program, Clara nearly collapsed with relief and joy. Even more incredible was the news that Mr. Langston, the conductor who had first encouraged her, had secured a sponsorship to cover her tuition and living expenses. For the first time in her life, Clara felt like the weight of the world had lifted off her shoulders. Returning home, Clara became a local hero. Neighbors who had barely acknowledged her before now greeted her warmly, congratulating her on her success. The same teachers who had doubted her potential invited her to perform at school events, eager to showcase her talent. But Clara remained humble, never letting the attention go to her head. She knew how quickly fortunes could change and how important it was to stay grounded. Years passed, and Clara flourished at the conservatory. Under the guidance of world-class instructors, she honed her skills and developed her unique style. Her music told stories of resilience and hope, resonating deeply with audiences wherever she performed. By the time she graduated, she had earned a reputation as one of the most promising young violinists of her generation. But Clara didn't forget where she came from. Determined to give back, she used part of her earnings from performances and scholarships to fund music programs for underprivileged children in her hometown. She visited schools, sharing her story and encouraging students to pursue their dreams no matter the obstacles. "If I can do it," she often said during these visits, holding up her battered violin, "so can you." Don't let anyone tell you your dreams are too big or your beginnings too small. Her mother watched proudly as Clara transformed from the shy, bullied girl she once knew into a confident woman inspiring others. On quiet evenings, they would sit together, reminiscing about the long journey that had brought them here. Clara's old violin still rested in its case, a cherished reminder of how far she had come, and proof that broken things could create something beautiful when given love and care. Though her life had changed dramatically, Clara remained true to herself. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she faced it with the same determination that had carried her this far. Every note she played was a testament to her strength, her courage, and her unshakable belief in the power of music to heal and uplift. And as she stood on stages around the world, bowing to roaring applause, Clara silently thanked the little girl who had dared to dream and refused to give up. As the applause continued to echo through the auditorium, Clara felt a wave of emotions crash over her: relief, pride, but also disbelief. She had spent so long expecting ridicule that hearing genuine admiration from the audience felt surreal. Her classmates, who moments ago had mocked her, now sat in stunned silence, their smirks replaced by wide-eyed stares. Some even clapped hesitantly, as if unsure what else to do. For Clara, it was both vindication and validation, a moment she never thought she'd experience. The judge who had approached her introduced himself as Mr. Langston, a renowned conductor visiting from the city. He explained that he had been invited to attend the competition as part of a panel searching for promising young talent. His words were warm and encouraging, but when he mentioned the possibility of an audition at his conservatory, Clara's heart skipped a beat. "We're always looking for students with passion," he said, his eyes kind yet serious. "Your music speaks volumes about your dedication. If you're interested, I'd like to offer you the chance to audition." We'll provide support for your education if you make the cut. Clara could barely believe what she was hearing. A conservatory in the city. It sounded like something out of a dream. But before she could respond, another voice interrupted them. One of her former bullies, Sarah, walked up nervously, her face flushed. Hi, Clara," she stammered, glancing at the floor. "I just wanted to say, that was really good. Like, really amazing." Behind her, a few others nodded awkwardly, murmuring apologies or compliments they clearly hadn't planned to give. For a moment, Clara didn't know how to react. These were the same people who had laughed at her clothes, called her cruel names, and dismissed her dreams without a second thought. Yet here they were, fumbling over their words, trying to make amends. Part of her wanted to lash out, to tell them exactly how much their cruelty had hurt. But instead, she took a deep breath and smiled softly. "Thank you," she said simply. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Later that evening, after the award ceremony, Clara returned home feeling lighter than she had in years. She had placed second in the competition, earning not only recognition, but also a small cash prize that would help her family get through the next few months. More importantly, she had secured an invitation to audition at one of the most prestigious music academies in the country. When she told her mother the news, tears streamed down her mom's face. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, pulling Clara into a tight hug. "You've worked so hard for this." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in her mind. The applause, the judges' praise, the unexpected kindness from her peers. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. But what struck her most was the realization that none of it would have happened if she hadn't taken a leap of faith. If she had let fear or self-doubt stop her, she would still be the girl everyone overlooked. Instead, she had stepped onto that stage and shown the world, and herself, that she was capable of greatness. As dawn broke the next morning, Clara climbed out of bed and opened her violin case. Running her fingers over the familiar scratches and cracks, she smiled. This battered instrument had carried her through some of the darkest moments of her life, and now it had helped her shine brighter than she ever imagined possible. Though her journey was far from over, Clara knew one thing for certain. No matter where life took her, she would always carry the lessons she had learned along the way. The power of resilience, the importance of believing in yourself, and the beauty of turning pain into art. The day of the competition arrived, and Clara woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest. Her hands trembled as she dressed in the nicest outfit she owned, a plain blue dress that had once belonged to her mother. She carefully packed her violin into its battered case, making sure the strings were secure and the bow was tucked safely inside. The morning air was chilly, and the walk to the community center where the event was being held felt endless. With each step, her heart beat faster, and her mind raced with questions. Would anyone even listen to her, or would they laugh before she could finish her first note? When she arrived, the building buzzed with energy. Contestants milled about nervously, some tuning their gleaming instruments while others whispered to friends or family members who had come to cheer them on. Clara stood near the entrance, clutching her violin case tightly, trying to blend into the walls. She couldn't help but notice how different she looked compared to everyone else. While most contestants wore polished shoes and expensive outfits, her faded dress and scuffed sneakers drew curious, and sometimes mocking, glances. A group of teenagers from her school spotted her almost immediately. One of them snickered loudly enough for her to hear. "Look who decided to show up," another said, pointing at her violin case. "I guess Dumpster Diva thinks she can win this thing." Their laughter echoed in her ears, making her cheeks burn with shame. For a moment, Clara considered turning around and leaving. What was the point of staying if they already thought she didn't belong? But then she remembered why she was there. Not for them, but for herself. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to ignore their comments and focus on what mattered: the music. She found a quiet corner backstage, away from the crowd, and opened her violin case. Running her fingers over the familiar scratches and cracks, she reminded herself of all the hours she had spent practicing, all the nights she had poured her heart into every note. This wasn't just about winning. It was about proving to herself that she could face her fears. When the host called her name, Clara's legs felt like jelly as she walked onto the stage. The bright lights blinded her momentarily, and the murmurs of the audience seemed deafening. She scanned the room quickly and saw her classmates sitting near the front, smirking and whispering behind their hands. Tears threatened to well up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. Instead, she focused on the judges seated at a table in the center, their faces neutral and unreadable. Clara took her place under the spotlight, adjusted her stance, and lifted her violin to her chin. For a brief second, everything else faded. The whispers, the judgmental stares, even the fear. All that remained was the instrument in her hands and the melody waiting to be played. Drawing in a shaky breath, she began. At first, her notes wavered slightly, betraying her nervousness. But as she continued, something shifted. The music flowed more steadily, filling the room with an emotional depth that silenced the audience. Her piece told a story of struggle, resilience, and hope, and it came alive through every stroke of her bow. There were moments when the rawness of her technique showed, but instead of detracting from the performance, it added authenticity. By the time she reached the final crescendo, the entire room was captivated. As the last note hung in the air, Clara lowered her violin, her hands trembling again, but this time not from fear. For a split second, there was complete silence. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. It started softly, almost hesitantly, but soon grew louder and more enthusiastic. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Even her classmates, who had mocked her earlier, looked stunned into silence, their jaws slack with disbelief. Clara stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Was this real? Had they really just cheered for her asterisk? As she stepped off the stage, still clutching her violin, she noticed one of the judges approaching her. He was an older man with silver hair and a kind smile. Extending his hand, he said warmly, "That was extraordinary. You have a rare gift." For the first time that day, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she truly belonged here. As the date of the competition drew closer, Clara's excitement began to mix with a growing sense of dread. Every time she thought about stepping onto that stage, her stomach twisted into knots. What if she froze under the bright lights? What if her fingers slipped and ruined the melody she had worked so hard to perfect? Worst of all, what if the audience laughed at her, not just for her old violin, but for daring to think she belonged on such a big stage? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara sat outside on the cracked concrete steps behind her apartment building. She held her battered violin close, running her fingers lightly over its worn surface. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves, but Clara barely noticed. Her mind was racing with doubts. Was she foolish to believe she could compete against students who likely came from families with money, resources, and connections? Would anyone even listen to her music, or would they dismiss her before she played a single note? She started to play softly, letting the music flow out into the quiet night. It was one of her favorite pieces, a hauntingly beautiful melody that always made her feel like she was floating above her worries, if only for a little while. As she played, an unexpected voice broke through the silence. "That's quite something." Clara nearly dropped her violin in surprise. She turned around to see Mr. Grayson, the elderly man who lived 2 doors down. He was leaning on his cane, his kind eyes twinkling beneath the brim of his worn hat. Clara had seen him sitting on his porch many evenings, listening quietly as she practiced. But he had never spoken to her directly until now. "You scared me," Clara admitted, clutching her violin tightly. "Sorry about that," Mr. Grayson said with a chuckle. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I've been meaning to talk to you, though. That violin, it sounds better than most people give it credit for." Clara looked down at her instrument, suddenly self-conscious. "It's not much," she mumbled. "Just something I found in the trash years ago." "Well, maybe so," Mr. Grayson replied gently, "but it's what you do with it that matters. And let me tell you, girl, you've got talent. Talent doesn't care where your violin came from, or your clothes, for that matter." His words caught Clara off guard. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Finally, she managed a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Mr. Grayson nodded and gestured toward the steps beside her. "Mind if I sit?" Clara shook her head, scooting over slightly to make room. As he settled down beside her, he told her about his own past. Once upon a time, he had been a violinist in the local orchestra, performing in theaters and concert halls across the region. But arthritis had forced him to retire years ago, leaving him with nothing but memories and a deep love for music. "I can hear it in your playing," he said after a pause. "You've got heart. That's rare these days. But technique, you could use some help there." Clara blinked, unsure of what to say. Before she could respond, Mr. Grayson leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Let me help you, not because I pity you, but because I think you've got a shot at something great. You remind me of myself when I was younger, scared but determined. Don't waste that." For the first time in weeks, Clara felt a flicker of hope. Over the next few days, Mr. Grayson became her unofficial mentor. He taught her how to hold her bow more steadily, how to control her vibrato, and how to add subtle nuances to her performance that transformed simple notes into something truly magical. Each lesson left her feeling more confident, more prepared. Yet, despite his guidance, fear still lingered in the back of her mind. The night before the competition, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every possible scenario in her head. What if she forgot her piece halfway through? What if the judges hated her music? What if her classmates showed up just to laugh at her again? Every question felt heavier than the last, pressing down on her chest until it was hard to breathe. But then she remembered Mr. Grayson's words. Talent doesn't care where your violin came from. Slowly, she reached for her violin case, opened it, and held the instrument close. Its scratches and cracks weren't flaws. They were reminders of how far she'd come. Tomorrow, she would step onto that stage, not to prove herself to anyone else, but to honor the music that had carried her through the hardest moments of her life. Whatever happened next, she knew she wouldn't regret trying. One crisp autumn morning, as Clara walked to school with her violin case slung over her shoulder, she noticed something unusual pinned to the bulletin board outside the main entrance. It was a bright yellow flyer advertising a regional talent competition. The words, "Discover Your Potential," were printed boldly at the top, alongside an image of a spotlight shining down on a microphone. According to the flyer, participants would perform in front of judges and a live audience, and the winner would receive a full scholarship to attend a prestigious music academy in the city. Clara's heart skipped a beat. A music academy. The idea seemed almost too good to be true. She had always dreamed of studying under skilled teachers, learning techniques she could only read about in books, and performing on stages bigger than anything her small town had ever seen. But as quickly as excitement bubbled up inside her, doubt crept in. How could someone like her, a girl with a patched-up dress and a battered violin, ever stand a chance against other contestants who probably owned expensive instruments and took private lessons? What if she made a fool of herself in front of everyone? Still, the thought wouldn't leave her mind. That afternoon, during study hall, Clara found herself doodling musical notes in the margins of her notebook while staring absently at the flyer she tucked into her textbook. She imagined standing on a stage, bowing before an audience, and letting her music speak for itself. Maybe this was her chance to show people that she wasn't just the dumpster diva. Maybe this was her chance to prove, to herself, if no one else, that her dreams weren't as impossible as they seemed. After school, Clara decided to sign up. She approached the registration table set up in the cafeteria. clutching the flyer tightly in her hand. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone nearby could hear it. As she filled out the form, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the student volunteers helping organize the event. When she handed in the paper, one of them raised an eyebrow at her name but didn't say anything. Clara hurried away, feeling both relieved and terrified. She didn't tell anyone, not her mother, not even her closest friend, if she could call him that, Mr. Grayson, the elderly neighbor who sometimes listened to her practice from his porch. Telling them meant making her dream real. And what if it all fell apart? What if she embarrassed herself and let everyone down? For now, keeping it a secret felt safer, like tucking away a fragile treasure where no one could touch it. Over the next few weeks, Clara threw herself into practicing harder than ever before. She spent every spare moment working on her pieces, experimenting with different melodies until her fingers ached. Late at night, when the rest of the apartment was silent, she played softly by the window, imagining the spotlight warming her face and the sound of applause filling the air. There were moments when fear threatened to overwhelm her, the kind that whispered she wasn't good enough, that she'd never measure up, but she pushed those thoughts aside. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, and she refused to let it slip through her fingers. As the days passed, Clara began to feel a spark of determination burning within her. No matter how scared she was, or how much the odds seemed stacked against her, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't give up without trying. Whatever happened on that stage, she wanted to look back and know she had given it everything she had. After all, wasn't that what her father used to tell her? Clara, he'd say with a proud smile, life doesn't hand you opportunities. You have to take them. And now, standing at the edge of something big, she was ready to do just that. The teasing at school was relentless, and Clara quickly became the favorite target of jokes for many of her classmates. Every day felt like a battle she had to face alone. As soon as she stepped into the hallway, whispers followed her. Some kids pointed at her patched-up clothes, while others snickered at the battered violin case she carried everywhere. They called her names like Trash Symphony, Dumpster Diva, and even worse things that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. It wasn't just the words. They were cruel enough, but it was also the looks. The way they stared at her as if she didn't belong, as if she were some kind of outsider who had wandered into their perfect world by mistake. During lunch breaks, Clara often sat alone on a bench near the edge of the schoolyard, far away from the noisy groups of students laughing and sharing snacks. She'd open her violin case carefully, running her fingers over the worn wood, finding comfort in its familiar imperfections. Sometimes, she'd hum softly to herself or practice finger movements on an imaginary string when no one was looking. But even then, there were always eyes watching her. One afternoon, as she quietly packed up her violin after a brief moment of peace, a group of girls walked past. One of them kicked the leg of the bench hard enough to make Clara jump, causing her violin to slip out of her hands and hit the ground with a dull thud. "Oops," the girl said mockingly, though everyone knew it wasn't an accident. The others erupted into laughter, doubling over as if it were the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Clara bit her lip to hold back tears, picked up her violin, and hurried inside without saying a word. That night, as she inspected the new scratch on her already damaged instrument, she wondered why people could be so mean. Why did they care so much about what she wore or how her violin looked? Couldn't they hear the music she created? Didn't they understand how much this little instrument meant to her? Even the teachers weren't on her side. When Clara asked to join the school orchestra, hoping to play alongside other students, the music teacher shook his head dismissively. "You wouldn't fit in here," he said bluntly, glancing at her shabby clothes and scuffed violin. "This is for serious musicians." His words stung more than any insult from her peers, because they came from someone who was supposed to encourage her. Clara left the room fighting back tears, feeling like the entire world was against her. At home, things weren't much easier. Her mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and rarely had time to talk. Still, Clara tried not to burden her with her problems. Instead, she practiced her violin late at night when the apartment was quiet. She played softly so as not to disturb the neighbors, letting the melodies fill the empty spaces around her. Each note carried a piece of her heart, her hopes, her fears, her dreams. Music was the only thing that made sense in a world that seemed determined to push her down. One evening, after another long day of ridicule, Clara stood in front of the cracked mirror in their tiny bathroom. She stared at her reflection, studying the tired eyes and messy hair. For a moment, she let herself imagine what life might be like if she were someone else, if she had nice clothes, a shiny new violin, and friends who cheered her on instead of tearing her apart. But deep down, she knew she couldn't change who she was. All she could do was keep going, keep playing, and hope that someday, somehow, the world would see her for more than her old clothes and broken violin. Until then, she promised herself she wouldn't give up. Not on her music, and not on herself. In a small, quiet town where everyone seemed to know each other's business, there lived a young girl named Clara. She was 16 years old, with soft brown eyes that always seemed to carry a hint of sadness. Life hadn't been kind to her family. After her father passed away unexpectedly, they were left struggling to make ends meet. Her mother worked long hours at a diner, often coming home exhausted, while Clara tried her best to help by taking care of their tiny apartment and cooking simple meals. Clara didn't have the fancy clothes or shiny shoes that many of the other kids wore to school. Instead, she patched up her old dresses and stitched together mismatched buttons to keep them from falling apart. To most people in town, especially her classmates, Clara looked like someone who didn't belong. They whispered about her behind her back, pointing out how worn out her shoes were or how her sweater had faded colors. But what caught their attention the most was the strange violin case she carried everywhere. The violin inside wasn't anything special. In fact, it was far from it. Years ago, when Clara was just 10, she had found the instrument tossed into a trash bin near the park. Its strings were frayed, the wood scratched and cracked, and one of the tuning pegs barely held on. Most people would have walked right past it without a second thought, but something about the abandoned violin spoke to Clara. She picked it up, brought it home, and spent weeks trying to fix it. With some glue, patience, and borrowed tools, she managed to get it working again. Every evening, after finishing her homework and chores, Clara would sit by the window and play. At first, the sounds were rough and uneven, more noise than music. But over time, her fingers learned to dance across the strings, coaxing out melodies that seemed to echo the emotion she couldn't put into words. For Clara, the violin wasn't just an object. It was her companion, her escape, and her voice all rolled into one. When she played, she could forget about the teasing, the bills piling up at home, and the weight of feeling invisible. But no matter how much joy the violin brought her, it only made things worse at school. Her classmates mocked her endlessly, calling her cruel names like dumpster diva because of where she'd found the instrument. Some even imitated the screechy sounds of her early attempts at playing, laughing loudly whenever she walked by. Teachers weren't much better. They dismissed her interest in music, assuming someone from her background wouldn't amount to anything significant. Despite all this, Clara refused to give up. She practiced every chance she got, determined to improve. Sometimes she'd sneak away during lunch breaks to practice in an empty classroom, hiding so no one would see her. Other times, she'd sit outside under the stars, letting the cool night air wrap around her as she poured her heart into the music. Each note felt like a step forward, a way to prove, to herself, if not to anyone else, that she was capable of creating something beautiful, even if the world seemed determined to ignore her.